things have changed within the last few days regarding Clarence's case, and so I'll, give the most updated information I have, starting with for the people who don't know who Clarence Moses is or who he was 28 years ago before he was arrested, charged, and convicted of a crime he did not commit. I'll give a brief update or background of the case. And first, I would start. I was trying to think of what I was doing in 1987. I was like 10 or 11, or 10 going on 11. And looking back at that period, the period of the 80s during Reagan years was a very lean and hard period in history. And it's only gotten worse since then in a lot of respects. But just imagining how the great leaps in technological advances that have happened since then. You remember in 1987, we didn't have a home phone. We were too poor to have a home phone, but most people had a home phone. A lot of people had rotary phones. Very few people actually had car phones. We only saw them on television. And most of the cell phones that existed shortly after that were the big satchel phones. We had the big case, you had the huge phone with the even longer antenna. So it was much different. Computers, in order to use them, you had to know basic Pascal or COBOL computer language in order to write a program to get it to do anything. Computers operated in DOS. There weren't operating systems. Very few people actually had one in their home. There wasn't the internet. There were a lot of things that we take for granted. Cameras. Who has a camera anymore? Everyone had a Polaroid camera back then. It was just so much drastically different, and things have changed very rapidly and quickly. So imagine, the years that have passed by and watching those things happen, but also imagine not being able to watch not just the technological advances happen, but if you have small children, having them grow from being very tiny, barely speaking, toddling around, playing, to becoming full adults and not being able to see that process happen. To not be able to see them have their own children, to see your nieces and nephews grow up, to see your brothers, to not be able to touch them, to hug your mother, and to have her pass away while you were locked behind bars for something that that you did not commit. And imagine being pulled away, the instance of being pulled away and being completely shocked that you were being arrested for something that you had no clue even transpired. Being with your children and having police drive up and grab you and place you under arrest and take you away. This has happened many times to political people, but this isn't a political person. It was just somebody going about the rigors of everyday life, enjoying being with their family, enjoying being with their friends, being a working person, being an oppressed person, and just living life, and then having it ripped away from them. And going through the whole process, perhaps in disbelief, believing that this is some sort of nightmare, and not being able to wake up from it. We've all had those kind of nightmares, and you sort of know while you're living through it, this is not real, this is not really happening, but you go through the process, and when you finally wake up, you're like, oh, wow, that was a nightmare. That was not actually real. But to have this go on for 28 years and not be able to wake up from it, this is the ordeal that Clarence Thomas has lived with for these many years. It's a long time. And 28 years ago, like I said, I was 10 or 11. So the background of the case is that the victim had been out with some people, had come home, and shortly after arriving home and lying down on the couch, was brutally assaulted and attacked by someone who she was not able to see, to the point of losing sight in one of her eyes. And when the police arrived, gave 3 names, Elsie, Earl, and Darnell, as being responsible, even though she was not able to see who actually brutally assaulted and raped her. And unfortunately, a day and a half passes by, or maybe a little bit longer, and the victim, who is still in the hospital, says that she had a premonition, and in her premonition she saw the face of Clarence Moses, who was not Clarence Moses L at that point, but was known as Clarence Moses. The cops never questioned Elsie, Earl, or Darnell, but went to pick up Clarence Moses and questioned him and charged him. And at that time, DNA evidence was fairly new. Defense attorneys weren't, did not know much about the science, and so did not use it, and neither did prosecution use it very often. What they were able to do is to take a semen analysis, and they were able to determine certain antigens in the semen analysis that did not actually match Clarence Moses at all. It more closely matched, they would come to find out, Elsie Jackson. But he was neither arrested nor was he ever questioned. In 1996, shortly after the science of DNA became more well known, Clarence Moses was able, through Barry Scheck and the Innocence Project, to win a court order to have his DNA evidence that was sitting in a locker room at Denver Police Department headquarters tested. It was in a box marked "Do Not Destroy." It sat after the court order for 4 weeks, and then it was thrown away by Detective James Huff. James Huff was also a detective who later gave a sworn statement to the court saying that he did not believe that Clarence Moses was guilty, and that he wished there had been DNA evidence, and that's ironic because he's the one who actually threw the evidence away. But he gave sworn testimony saying he wished there had been DNA evidence because he believes it would have exonerated Clarence Moses, because he never felt that he was actually guilty of what he was charged and convicted of. And so he had been in prison since arrested in 1987, convicted in 1988. And it's like running a marathon and you get to the finish line and somebody keeps pulling the finish line back farther and farther. So I'm sure you can think of having such a victory of having winning a court order to have it tested, and to be feeling that I'm going to be free someday. I'm going to be able to walk out here, and my children have not been able to see me because he demanded that they not come and see him locked behind bars, because he believed that he would be free. And so they haven't seen him, except for later when he had his hearing on the evidentiary hearing on the new evidence. And then to have that evidence thrown away, to be feeling so close, and then once again to be feeling it to be so far away. And that's the feeling that he had in 1996. A few years passed by. The case began getting more, became more renowned. A few journalists had started writing about it, and one of the persons who was in the Colorado legislature became aware of it, and they began having hearings on, actually, the attorneys filed all the way up to the Supreme Court that because his evidence was destroyed, that he should be granted a new trial and the conviction should be overturned. And it was decided by the Supreme Court that it would have to be shown that the evidence was destroyed and there was a malicious intent, which is almost impossible to prove someone's intent behind the actions that they do. So it would have to be malicious intent in order for there to be a new trial on the basis of the destruction of DNA evidence. And so there were hearings in the Colorado State Legislature regarding what should happen, when someone's evidence is destroyed, should they be granted a new hearing? And there were some changes that were made. Unfortunately, they did not apply to Clarence Moses L. So again, so close yet so far away. In 2012 or 2013, Elsie Jackson, who was arrested for a rape of a mother and her 9-year-old daughter, which occurred in 1992. He was arrested later, I think in 2000 or late 1990s, for this crime, convicted and given a life sentence in prison. There were other rapes that were believed to have been committed by him, but he was charged and convicted for this particular act. this particular sexual assault and brutal assault on a mother and her 9-year-old daughter. He wrote a letter to Clarence Moses L., and I can't remember the exact wording that he used, but he spoke of his guilt and how he'd become a born-again Christian. And he said, let's start by bringing what was in the dark into the light. And he said, I don't know who was working on your case, but send them to me, and I want to confess, essentially. At that time, his attorney was Mark Burton. Well, shortly after, Mark Burton became his attorney and collected a statement from Elsie Jackson admitting that he was the one who was responsible for what happened to the victim. And so this is when we picked up the case and became aware of the case and begun getting more information out there, giving more exposure to the particular case, and started a campaign to have a call-in, write-in to Mitch Morrissey, who is the Denver District Attorney, who's in his last year as District Attorney in Denver County. And Mitch Morrissey decided that the victim's initial statement, which was not a statement against Clarence Moses, but was against Elsie, Earl, and Darnell, which Mitch Morrissey lied about and said that was not actually a written statement, and then it was shown to him the actual written statement, which mentions these people's name, and he said, "Oh, I forgot that happened." Said that the statement saying that Clarence was responsible was credible, and that he did not, that there was enough evidence to prove that he was guilty and that he did not need to reopen the case. Now, we can go over the evidence, and if you'd ask what that evidence actually is, it's a dream. No other evidence exists that would point towards Clarence Moses as being responsible. In fact, the evidence that does exist would points towards Elsie Jackson being responsible, not Clarence Moses L. So this is a case of a pig prosecutor who does want to admit fault or wrongdoing on the part of the DA's office and set this man free. So this had to go before a court. It was delayed 3 times, and eventually there was an evidentiary hearing regarding they actually sent someone there to coerce Elsie Jackson into recanting, and at some point Mark had to be removed as a lawyer of record on the case because the DA's office said that they had Elsie Jackson as a witness for the victim, and that he was going to recant and take his statement back. And so Mark had to be a witness, having witnessed the statement being given. In court, Elsie Jackson said exactly what he said originally regarding being responsible for the assault against this woman. Not only that, there was an expert who is a professor who basically said that, well, the analysis of the semen that was done is not necessarily enough to prove who was responsible, but it can almost with certainty prove who was not responsible, and that is Clarence Moses L. He said it can't necessarily point to who was responsible, but with almost certain can prove who is not responsible. And based off of this evidence, Clarence Moses L. could not have been responsible for the assault on this woman. And despite all of the attempts by the prosecution to poke holes in this person's testimony, they could not. He was an expert witness, which, you know, the prosecution is not regarding this type of evidence. And they tried to coerce and bully Elsie Jackson into changing his statement, which he refused to do, citing his conscience and having to come clean so that a man can walk free, can go home and be with his family. On Monday of this week, the judge in the case overturned the conviction. And you almost want to say that justice has prevailed, but what justice is there for a man who's been in prison for 28 years? It's a victory. But can we call it justice? You can't. He's 60 years old now. He can't go and get a job. How do you piece together your life when you've been living a half-life? Anyone who's ever been locked in a jail for a day, it's almost as if time moves at a crawl. You might think 2 hours have passed and it's only been 15 minutes. And imagine that for 28 years, living a half-life at a quarter speed. And this has been his reality for these years. And the fact that in prison they try and break you and deny your humanity, it's not just the putting you behind bars, but it's every aspect of living that type of life. My nephew, who's been sentenced to life in prison, writes to me and he tells me all the time that this is no place for a human being to be. But the fact that this man has not been broken and in some respects has been able to transcend his bars speaks to the spirit of not just him, but the spirit of oppressed people who have suffered long and who cannot be broken and will continue to fight long after the oppressor and the ruling class has given up. Long after they've retreated, we continue to fight because our place in the sun, the society that we deserve, the struggle continues long after we've, beaten and expropriated them. But back to this particular case. So Monday, the conviction was overturned, and the family was very much expecting that things would move much rapidly after that. It was expected that Clarence Moses would be transferred from a private prison facility in the south of Colorado to Denver and would get to Denver Thursday. But unfortunately, the bond hearing was postponed until next week. For what reasons, I could only speculate, but this is just another, torturous act, that's within the context of 29 years of torture of an innocent man. And it just shows how not just callous, but sick and sadistic the state, the repressive apparatus, and all of the functionaries who are involved with it are. That they can go home to their families, they can hug their children, they can hug their parents, they can hug their aunts and uncles, they can have their dog jump into their arms, but they can't look at another person as a human being and have any compassion towards them. This is what the state actually is. It's meant to break people, and the prison system is meant to break people and strip them of their humanity. But in this case, they haven't been able to do it. And so the family is upset that it's been postponed yet again. And I'm sure Clarence is upset. I've actually never spoken to Clarence. I've never met Clarence. I've spoken many times to his niece. We speak daily since Monday. And she expresses her frustration, but she also expresses that she believes that this is coming to an end and that he will be home and that they'll be able to touch him and that he'll never be able to be abused by the state the way he's been abused for these past 29 years. So we have asked since the postponement of the hearing that people bombard the DA's office yet again. And the first time we did it, we were so successful that the 9 News, which is the NBC affiliate in Denver, had to write a special report on the amount of calls and emails that they've received into the station regarding this particular case. That's all the report was about. We've been flooded with tips and calls about Clarence Moses' case. So we're asking that people do it yet again so that they don't attempt to try and appeal this judge's decision, so that they don't try and go forward with another sham trial, because that's exactly what it is, and so that they drop the case and that they free Clarence Moses L. so he can go about his life. And whatever he decides to do from this point, I believe that he should extract every penny from Colorado and Denver. Billions of dollars. You can't really even quantify what it means to you lose 29 years of your life, but whatever he can get, he should fight for every penny. Not just the state and the city of Denver, but every functionary that was involved in his imprisonment over these years. If he chooses to do that, we should support him in every way. Because this man has been tortured. 29 years of torture. That's what it is. And he deserves everything, every penny that he can extract from them. And I do believe, and my time is up, you know, I've been gone for a long time. I haven't done this in a while, and you get rusty at speaking publicly. But for anyone who was worried about my commitment as a revolutionary, you need not worry. It's victories like these, like this victory, after this long, torturous 29 years, that keep us going. But what draws us to this, and there are a lot of people who are coming out of the woodworks because it's safe for them now to come out of the woodworks and say, okay, we support Clarence. 2 years ago, but now that a judge has overturned a conviction, we can come out, we can say we support him. But it was never a question for a revolutionary whether or not we were going to support Clarence Moses. It was a question of what can we do and how quickly can we do it, not whether or not we were going to support him. And that's what we are. We don't do it for the fame. We don't do it for money. Frankly, most of the people in this room, if we were not revolutionaries, we could actually do pretty well financially if we chose to. But we do it because we believe in the struggle, and we know how repressive the system can be. And wherever there's anyone who is under the gun, who is facing repression, extra repression, we believe in fighting for them as an individual, but fighting for our class and fighting for all the oppressed. And Clarence is very much one of us. And even if he doesn't decide, even if he doesn't join the struggle and he lives his life, we should all consider this a victory for the oppressed and the despised and the dispossessed around the world. And until that happens, continue to keep up the calls, continue to keep up the emails, and hopefully after the new year, we'll be able to actually get him to call in and speak about what it's like to walk free from that hellhole. So, thank you, comrades.